Okay, I want your guys' help with something. Part of me is convinced I was abducted by fairies when I was a child. As far as the existence of fairies go, I don't have enough evidence for or against it to make a conclusive call, right? Like, I'm talking about something that was so prevalent through human history, but there's no, like, direct scientific evidence for it. So, like, that's not important. I want to talk about why this keeps coming up in my life. There's a couple of bits of evidence, and I know this probably sounds like a crazy thing, but I'm just curious what you guys think. You tell me in the comments your interpretation of these events. But for some reason, ever since I was a child, I have this like recurring fear of like being in a small space underground surrounded by tiny people. Terrifying. And I know that there's terrifying. And for real, like, I know that there are some reasons for that. Like I was telling you in the puppetry episode, Fraggle Rock, for some reason, freaked me the heck out. And I wasn't scared of like all puppets and stuff, but I was terrified of Fraggle Rock. And I didn't even ever watch Fraggle Rock. It was just from the trailer for it. For some reason, the idea of just a little bunch of tiny guys who have like tied me up, and I'm like underground in a place that I can't get out of, in like a small place. And sometimes I still have dreams that are like totally different interpretations of it. I don't know why I feel this way. I can't think of any singular event when I was a child. I remember I don't know if you ever watched Little Bear. We used to love Little Bear, but there was like, they always had like two stories in one episode. And I remember there was one episode where like Little Bear's dad is a monster, and that was already kind of scary as a little kid. But then the other episode was like Little Bear getting abducted by tiny gnomes, and that like gave me the same feeling. And like this idea of being trapped in a world that wasn't quite my world was terrifying to me as a child. And it actually made it hard to watch claymation, because claymation also kind of hit that fear that I had as a kid, that like, what if I'm trapped in Wallace and Gromit's world? I'm over it now. I can watch Wallace and Gromit. It's great. But like, still, like that underlying fear is like, what if I was trapped in that world? And I also, for some reason, can say, I know this is wild, but like, that's why I'm asking your help with it. There's also some connection to the Uncanny Valley. And I might do a whole video about the Uncanny Valley too. Yeah, let me write these down, Nick. I keep having ideas and then not writing them down, and then I forget about them. So, Uncanny Valley. We'll go into all the history and stuff. And then the other one is fairies. Yeah, just history of fairies. Actually, I might have already had that one. Anyways, so I don't know where this fear comes from. The Uncanny Valley, if you haven't heard of it, I'm sure you have, is the fact that we like have an uneasiness with things that are sort of human, but almost human, I should say. Almost human, but not quite there. Because things that are like vaguely human, we don't have a worry with at all. Like traditional animation and, you know, some sorts of toys and everything don't freak us out. But like, if it gets really close and it's not quite there, it's almost like we have an ancient defense mechanism against that, which is fascinating and terrifying. I feel like the Uncanny Valley is what a fish would feel when an angler fish is luring it in. And it's like, this is wrong, but I feel like I'm going in. So it kind of feels like maybe there was something in human history that used to appear to be human, but was barely off. There's lots of theories about the Uncanny Valley. Like I said, we'll get to that later. For me, this very specific fear of being abducted it's been like showing up more and more over the years. And it's kind of weird. Like, I've always also been scared of aliens. And there's a lot of people that think like whatever the alien phenomenon is the same thing as whatever the fairy phenomenon was back in the day, because they're so similar with the reports of orbs of light floating through the woods and creatures that are sort of human but not quite, and they're always a little bit smaller than people are, which is something that, like, if fairies are real, they don't look like the kind of fairies that we think about. And actually, I'll probably do a whole episode on fairies. The idea of the butterfly-winged, dainty fairies is totally Victorian propaganda. The actual fairies, when, like, people believed in them back in the day, the Europeans, it was freaky. They could abduct you. there's something, I feel like if they were real, they would seem different in different situations, or be able to change shape and form and all of these things like we hear about in the actual source material, in the stories. And they take you and they kind of do things to you. Nowadays it's experiments. Back in the day was they'd play tricks on you or make you dance until your toes fell off, or like these sorts of things, right? Sometimes they were benevolent, sometimes they were malevolent, and you just never knew for sure, but they were denizens of a completely other world, right? So that's freaky. I don't subscribe fully to the fact that like fairies are aliens, aliens are fairies, but I also have had like a fear of like when I'm alone in bed at night sleeping, if I imagine something standing in my room that freaks me out, it's always the alien from Signs. And like, thank you, M. Night Shyamalan. Not everybody loves M. Night Shyamalan for different reasons, but like Signs is one of the best movies ever made because it makes you feel things no other movie has made you feel. And in my opinion, still has the best aliens. Even though the CGI is dated and everything, it has the best, like the feeling it makes you feel. Those are the aliens that I would expect to see standing at the end of my bed if I woke up in the middle of the night. And these two fears are separate, right? The fear of being underground, surrounded by little people, and the fear of an alien at the end of my bed are different. But it's the abduction part that kind of made me like, was I abducted? I've never felt like I was. I've never gone through regressive hypnotherapy to find out. Mostly because I'm scared I'm going to find out that I was freaking abducted by fairies. I just want to know where this fear comes from. Like, was there a traumatic thing as I was from a kid? Or, like, is a movie that scares you enough to just, like, stay with you that long? I don't know. And so that's why I'm asking you guys. If you know anything about it, let me know. Was I freaking abducted by fairies? I had a dream, like, a month ago, within the last month, that gave me a little bit of that fear. Like, I could taste it. That flavor came back a little bit when I was climbing through like a McDonald's funhouse, but it was getting smaller and smaller. And I don't know where that comes from, but it's tied into that fear. You know, like I claustrophobia is something that I kind of had as a kid, and that's tied to it. Like the idea of being in an underground cavern that you can't get out of, or an enclosed space that only has a doorway that's tiny for the tiny people, not for you when you can't get out. What are they going to do to you in there? And it's also kind of like, you know what it also makes me feel like is freaking Beatrix Potter. That one, the Peter Rabbit, where the mice are going to eat the cat in pudding. Like they're rolling the cat up in pudding. I don't know if you guys even know what I'm talking about at all, but it kind of gives me that, I'm just chasing the feeling. I'm chasing the feeling of like little guys that like maybe are going to eat me. But then there's also like, they don't have to be little, like the idea of a giant getting me that's going to eat me as well gives me like a similar sort of feeling. You're just like trapped, can't get away. So probably just some like childhood, totally psychology-based explanations that would totally make sense. But also maybe I was abducted by fairies when I was a kid. It could be true. So if you guys know anything, if you have any leads, let me know. I've never tried the hypnotherapy thing. I've entertained the thought, but never explored that avenue because it doesn't really affect my quality of life every day. Like it's not something it comes up very often, but it is mysterious. And like, you know, I have this interesting thing from my childhood that I'll probably talk about in another video where I almost die every 2 years. I should write that down. Future video. Thanks for sticking with me, guys. The curse is what we call it. So I'm going to make that video next, though I can't remember all. Anyway, every 2 years I almost died as a kid. And I'm not talking like, oh, like I almost die all the time. Like literally almost drowned when I was 2, got bit by a black widow when I was 4, like stuff like that. I don't know if the curse is still going on, but yeah, tell me if you know of anything. I'm fascinated with fairy folklore. I'm fascinated with the fact that, like, throughout all of human history, we kind of have this connection with some of these other worlds that, like, just exist, and we don't know anything about them. And it seems like humans from ages past kind of intuitively knew that our world was not the only one, and we're just barely kind of discovering that and confirming that with the math and the science. That, like, our reality is probably far from the only one that's out there. And that's just like what the math shows. So anyway, yeah, help me out here. And if you were the fairies that abducted me as a kid, tell me so I can make things right. Because I'm coming for you. Yeah, that's right. I'm not a kid anymore. You can't abduct me anymore, fairies. You come to try to abduct me. You try to steal my shadow. You try to take my name. It ain't happening. Even though one of my favorite theories for ADHD is that as a child, one of the Fae came up and said, "Can I have your attention?" We said, "Sure," and it was over after that. I read that online somewhere. But anyway, thank you guys for hearing me out in this crazy rant. Not all of my videos are this unhinged, probably. But yeah, if you have any leads, let me know. I'm constantly investigating stuff like this. And yeah, have a good day. Don't get abducted.